Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I've been going out with a girl, her name is Julie, but last night she said to me when we were watching telly.
Just sort of circling around the suggestion that this story about Boris Johnson's links to an ex-model who received public money from his office while he was Mayor of London, that this is his shooting someone on Fifth Avenue moment, and he is trying to style it out, even though it was Rupert Murdoch's Sunday Times that broke the story. I just wonder whether you agree with me that if you're a leaver of a certain type, you're going to have to turn off your moral compass, even though normally you'd be really outraged by this. Not so much the mysterious afternoon meetings, but the questions he needs to answer about public money. I think you're going to turn off your moral compass because of Brexit, and that's yet more evidence of how damaged the country is already before it's even flipping happened. 12:37 is the time. Gary is in Shepherd's Bush. Gary, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I've turned up my moral compass over Boris Johnson. You know, the Garden Bridge. You're talking about his indiscretions, possibly.
Yeah.
I'll go as far as to say I'm a taxi driver. He was the one who allowed a certain minicab company to come into London, and basically they've got 100,000 people. I still will back him because of Brexit.
Good grief.
He's the only politician that, besides Mr Farage, but he hasn't got the infrastructure to actually win an election, that he's the only politician that will deliver Brexit. Now, that is the most important thing for me.
Yeah.
Over my finances, over my country. I want to put my country before my party or before my work.
Well,
That's how strong I feel about...
By putting an adulterous liar in charge of it?
Absolutely.
How does that work, Gary?
It works because of...
Just in a nutshell, how do you think it is good for your country to put a proven liar in charge of it?
Because Brexit is the biggest thing for my country that I can think of.
What if he lied about that?
Lifetime. Pardon?
What if he lied about that?
That's an opinion, James.
No, it's a question, Gary.
No matter what he says or what he's done in the past, if he delivers Brexit for me, I'm happy.
Yeah, but what if he lied about Brexit?
I'm happy.
You're happy being lied to?
No, not really.
So what if he lied about Brexit? We already know that the figure on the side of the bus was a lie, don't we?
No, I don't think it was a lie.
Well, he's admitted it was.
No.
So either he lied to you when he told you, or he lied to you because it's down to 250 million down in his own press releases.
The bus made absolutely no difference to my way of voting.
I didn't say it did. I just pointed out he already lied. He already lied.
But the Remainers lied as well, so I'm sorry, it works both ways.
No, it doesn't, does it? Because if
the Remainers said we'll have 800,000 unemployed as soon as we vote, and it's all rubbish.
If whoever said that had questions, if whoever said that had questions to answer about the allocation of public money while in office, then I would be leading calls for them to be held to account. You're on national radio saying I don't care what he's done.
I don't, because
that's fine.
Brexit. No, so he's a leader of a political party that can deliver Brexit.
Yeah.
The Labour Party cannot deliver Brexit. He won't deliver Brexit. The party's completely been taken over by momentum that won't allow Brexit to happen.
Before you go, what is it you're most looking forward to about Brexit, Gary?
What I'm most looking forward to is basically the right to govern our own country.
And where do you think that right is most absent at the moment? What do you point at as the areas where we can't govern our own country? Bearing in mind Boris Johnson has shut down Parliament because it had too much power. Yeah.
I disagree with what I'm trying to say, James. I disagree with him on so many issues, and
but you agree with him that we have to leave the European Union to govern our country. Although I've never heard him say that in public with a straight face. So just point me towards the bits of our country that we can't currently govern.
Our own laws.
Which laws?
Any laws.
Yeah, name one.
Our freedom of information.
Freedom of information, you think, is because of the European Union?
No, it's not. It's also...
So what then? What are you talking? Why have they got different laws in Scotland from what we've got in England if they all come from Brussels, Gary?
James, the biggest thing is we're not debating over Brexit. My mind's made up. I'm never going to change. So, you know...
No, it's all right. You don't have to change your mind. You just have to answer my question. If our laws come from Brussels, why are there different laws in Scotland from the ones in England?
Because on certain laws, they can make their own laws.
Right, so what laws can't we make?
We can't send a terrorist back because European courts of
European
human
Court of
rights
Human Rights has nothing to do with the European Union, Gary. And which terrorist are you thinking of?
Abu Hamza.
He's gone.
Yeah. How long did it take for him to be gone?
You just said he couldn't go. I just pointed out it had nothing to do with the European Union.
How many years was he in prison? And we were feeding him and clothing him and looking after him. And
that's why you want to leave the European Union?
No, that's one reason.
But except it's not, Gary. It's not a reason, because it's not true. He's not here. Yes, go on.
Right. The main reason I want to leave the European Union is that my father and my family fought in the war not to be taken over by a foreign power.
Yes, but we've just established that we haven't been taken over by a foreign power.
But we have, in my opinion.
And then I ask for some evidence, and you say something about Abu Hamza, mate. That's what Boris Johnson has done to you. That's what he's done to you.
You asked me a question of what... You asked me that question.
Yeah.
I could give you other examples.
Go on, then. Go on, then.
We don't control our own borders.
Yeah, go on, then.
I just said it. We don't control our own borders.
Well, who does?
500 million people are entitled to come to this country.
500 million people are entitled to come to Germany or France or Belgium or Portugal or Spain, unless the government introduces its own right to insist that if you haven't got a job after 3 months or enough money to prove that you can support yourself independently, they can ask you to go back to your country of origin, Gary. But you knew that, right?
They can. But we've got 2 million illegal immigrants in this country anyway.
And what's that got to do with the European... How do you know they're illegal if we're not controlling our borders, Gary?
Because you know as well as I do they are.
Oh, mate. So just to be clear, what could he do? Could he shoot someone on Goldhawk Road and he'd still have your vote?
That's going a little bit too far.
Why?
But
you've already revealed that your moral compass is shot to pieces and that you're supporting you support a liar.
Because I don't support him at all.
Yes, you do.
I don't like him one little bit.
No, you do support him.
But he's the only politician
who can deliver the Brexit that you can't explain why you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You got me there. 12:45.
I mean, I just wonder whether people have any bandwidth, any headspace for Labour's position at the moment. Terry in Archway has a thought on this. Hello, Terry.
Hi. Well, you know, the Labour Brexit position, which is begging for a second vote, another vote, and we've just heard Alex waxing lyrically on how it will be informed this time as opposed to 2016. What is the evidence for that? What is the evidence of the information? Look at these stats on the BBC that have been leaking out on how horrendously biased they are in all their representations, leaning towards a Remain narrative.
Which stats?
Consistently so.
Which stats?
Pardon?
Which stats?
Actually, I didn't bother to go to my reference and write them down, but
it's important to do that, though, Terry, because you know it's really important that we get things.
I'm not professional.
Well,
but
I am, which is why I'm intervening and saying that you can't just come on the radio and say the BBC or any other organisation, unless it expressly is doing so, is leaning towards Remain, is biased against you, and you. That's dangerous talk, Terry. That's why I'm into...
It's not just talk, though, is it? Because we've had the BBC...
Well, you're not able to provide the proof that it's anything other than talk coming from you. And until you are, and I certainly don't have that proof, then I'm not going to let you.
My source for it, anyone can see it, is Jeff Taylor on YouTube. He's a very well-renowned representative of the people's voice on Brexit. Jeff Taylor.
Who is he?
He's been following the Brexit process.
I have, but I'm not a source.
And informing us in using studying the background, studying the legal basis for it all, and giving his opinion.
But who is he?
Jeff Taylor on Twitter. He's got about.
But what's his expertise on this
40,000
front?
followers.
Has he done rigorous polling? Has he done rigorous testing of hours and hours of live broadcasting at the BBC and other places?
We've had the BBC admit that it's biased.
Have we? When did that happen?
Look at the elder statesman of the BBC who's been with them for all my lifetime, who's just retired.
Who?
His name?
Yeah.
His name is Mr. Everyone knows who he is. He's been all over the newspapers just yesterday, saying that as much as his career has been accomplished and
John Humphreys, you're talking about.
John Humphreys, yes, saying that the whole. But this, you're putting up barriers in front of me in order to stop me from getting my opinion across, that this last few days of the Labour Party conference have left me none the wiser. It seems now they're saying that basically if you've got a Range Rover, you're evil and it's your fault. If you can spell onomatopoeia, it's going to fairly disadvantage you in the world and put everyone at risk.
But who said that at the Labour Party conference?
Well, I had the luxury of coming from a background where I spent half my school years in a public school in North London, and then the second half in a comprehensive school. Mm-hmm. The difference is staggering. I do agree. You've got 5 schools, you've got science labs, and then when you go to the comprehensives, as I did, everything's broken, and the teachers call you thicko.
Well, again, that depends which comprehensive school, doesn't it?
Well, it's still going. It's North London. It's now a very changed school, completely from my day. But what I think is that what you had in the comprehensive school was a very good spirit.
Can I bring you back to Labour? Because it was Labour's position on Brexit that I was hoping you would share your views on, and I'm not putting obstacles in your way. I'm just challenging some of the things you say because you don't have evidence for them, or I know them not to be true. So that's all I'm doing, Terry. So Labour, you're confused, are you, by Labour's position still? It's not clear enough for you?
What's clear to me is that I don't think anyone can really dig down into the calculations that people are now supposed to be so informed of about free trade this or free trade that. What I've done is I've lived the last 25 years, and I'm still not convinced the European Union is a good idea. Now, these last 25 years, we've resigned ourselves to it. This is where we're going. This is what's going to happen. And all of a sudden we get a referendum, and everyone stands up and casts their vote. And they're overwhelming, over 1 million extra votes are tipping it towards Brexit. And what do we have now from Labour? We have this endless kind of jousting with endless possibilities, and what's more, a conference season that is absolutely reeking of lunacy, absolute lunacy, in terms of how many catastrophes can you pile upon the country in the future.
Which bits are lunacy? Because I heard John McDonnell's speech earlier on, and there was some great stuff in it. There was more investment in swimming pools, in parks, in libraries, in social care. There was all kinds of stuff in there.
£10,000 per person in social care, when they're paying, £1,000 a month, and they say the average one is 3 or 4 years. I mean, I've just come through a horrendous period of being a primary carer. It's really not just going to be fixed by saying it's going to be free. It's about training. Again, it's about making the caring profession a noble profession, and instilling in the young people a desire, like my sister had. My sister became a nurse. She used to dress up as a nurse as a kid. My mother was a doctor. She came through horrendous poverty of her youth and tuberculosis and all sorts of things, 13 operations. She hated the darn things, but ended up becoming an anaesthetist.
All right, well, listen, Terry, I'm going to leave it there with you. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you feel you got your view across in the end.
Boris Johnson made the point this afternoon when he was speaking in New York that as Prime Minister he has that power to prorogue Parliament. It is a power that has always rested with the Prime Minister, and that it isn't the place of the courts to intervene in any particular case and interfere with that power. And that was what hinged on the government's case, and that's they had nothing beyond that to offer the Supreme Court.
Will you stay? Because I want to speak to Elizabeth in Clacton before we go to the news at 2, but it may be that you might be more used to Elizabeth than me. Elizabeth, hello.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, Sheila and listeners. First of all, your remarks regarding the head judge, that Lady McHale, Spider-Woman. Hell, sorry, I think she's more like a Black Widow spider to me.
Shame.
And this ruling, I think, helps Boris 100%, because it proves once again another stitch-up by the establishment and unelected judges and Remainers, especially, interfering in government business when they have no right to.
But and Theo, come in on this if you wish. Elizabeth, the court ruled on one very narrow thing, which is whether or not the Prime Minister was acting lawfully when he did what he did.
Well, let
me finish. What it then did in an instant was hand everything back to the elected House of Commons. So how is that the judges ruling over us? How is that when they immediately, after that ruling, give it back to Parliament, the people that you and I put in Parliament, you and I?
But we all know, Sheila, that the Remainers are a majority in Parliament. John Major did the same thing. Was he hauled up before the Supreme Court?
Not for 5 weeks he didn't.
Did?
Not for 5 weeks he didn't.
Well, they're now confident. To be quite honest, we haven't had MPs in Parliament and we haven't really missed them, have we?
I have.
Well, I haven't, because they're all a bunch of... Well, I can't repeat it, but this...
Well, they're not, whatever you're about to say. They're not that.
Well, Boris is right. This just proves that they're... Any way they will try to stop Brexit, and this will give him more support than ever in the country outside the London bubble and the establishment, because it proves he was right all along. They want to stop Brexit by any means.
How often do you leave the southeast of England yourself, Elizabeth? I'm always interested by this London bubble argument.
I go up to London quite a bit.
No, I mean, when do you leave the southeast of England?
I visit people all over. I have relatives in Scotland, everywhere.
Yeah, and you go there a lot.
We all have different points of view. Okay. But we've all come to the conclusion that they want to stop Brexit by any means. And to think that we could have Jeremy Corbyn in charge for 2 weeks, or John Bercow, or Kenneth Clarke, or Harriet Harman, dictating what Parliament should do. When I mean, it's just
Theo, come in on that. Come in on that for Elizabeth and explain what that would be.
Elizabeth, I'm just interested to know, where do you've come to your judgment, respect it completely, but where do you, what's behind you forming that opinion? Genuinely interested. Because this is a really interesting point, because there are lots of people in Westminster saying this is a moment in Boris Johnson's premiership where he is he faces that he has been defeated by the courts. He's now got to return to Parliament to apologise, possibly resign. But there is also another school of... There are people, and myself included in this, who think that actually this could play well for Boris Johnson, because people like yourself and your friends will come to the conclusion that this is, as has been talked about by many people, this is the establishment frustrating the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the European Union.
But if I may, Theo, isn't it our job to explain that it isn't, because it demonstrably isn't, and our job is to help Elizabeth and others to understand, and for Elizabeth to tell us what's going on in her community. Fine, but where it is wrong, what she says, it's also our job to say that it is wrong.
But Theo asked me a question.
Yes, answer, but
and I'd like to answer.
Go on, Elizabeth. Do
we voted so many years ago to leave the EU? It's been frustrated by Parliament. Why on earth can't they just do it? This is what we can't understand. And now they want to extend it again from October. Well, when will it end? It will cause... You don't know the upset it's causing. When will it end?
And you ask a very valid question, Elizabeth, as part of your answer to Theo. But that's very different from where you began this conversation. You began this conversation saying that this is an establishment stitch-up, that the judges are out to get you. And that isn't true, Elizabeth.
Because they've tried every way to stop it. Gina Miller...
This case wasn't about Brexit. This case wasn't about Brexit.
Miller before this? Who paid her to pay for all this court cases?
She should never have had to.
Who is she?
She's an individual
Can I go
who...
to the Supreme Court tomorrow and say I object to what your judgment you came to? I can't, because I can't afford the top QCs in the country to represent me and 17 million people. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But Elizabeth, your question brings me right back to what I said at the beginning. Parliament is there for you, for me, for everyone who votes those people
in.
in.
Doing what we instructed them to do. There's more.
Parliament isn't there to take instructions.
They take our instructions.
No, they don't.
Well, they're not doing it, are they?
No, that's not their job to take instruction.
They are. That we put them there. They can get rid of them, but they won't have a general election.
But Elizabeth, thank you so much for your call. It's an interesting... It reveals a lot, Elizabeth's position, doesn't it? Because I understand her feelings, but Parliament isn't there to take our instruction. Jerry in Derby, hello.
Hello. The Brexiteers, are fed up, of people like the last person telling us that we don't understand the law, we don't understand the differences of it, and we don't understand about Brexit. We don't understand about anything. But one thing we do understand is that 17.4 million people decided to leave. We're going to leave. We're going to leave in bigger numbers than the last time, because the people who were a little bit undecided one way or the other are absolutely fuming that this is being done. And yesterday, you could have had a discussion about the Labour Party going to break the law, because they actually said they were going to break the law.
In what way?
Going to go and... No, they said they were going to break the law yesterday.
In what way? You'll have to remind me in what way they were going to break the law.
Because they voted that all the private education businesses in this country were going to be taken back. Not taken back, but...
integrated into the state, yeah.
No, stolen from the people who own that business.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, I'm just going to speak, if I may. I did have an hour-long discussion about that on the programme yesterday. I didn't frame it in the terms you have, not least because it isn't the Labour Party's position. It was a motion by delegates on the floor at the party conference. It could well become Labour Party policy, but that is still subject to them being voted in as a government. And then they would bring to the House of Commons the desire to change the law to make it different, and they would win or lose that based on the judgment of the sovereign parliament that we have. So it's not quite the same as them just breaking the law, is it? It's very different.
The intention is to go and steal other people's property.
Yeah, the intention is to change the law.
No. The change is to steal other people's property.
And Parliament, lucky us, Jerry, lucky us, Parliament is sovereign, and Parliament has the right to vote that down and stop it from happening, because Parliament is sovereign.
But yesterday, they voted on it, and then that becomes, because it's been voted upon at the Labour Party conference, that becomes part of their manifesto.
All right, Jerry, thank you. Brendan in Ruislip, hello.
Hi there, Sheila. I'd just like to say that basically, if we are in a dictatorship, how do you get out of the dictatorship without upsetting the establishment, doing something which the establishment says is wrong? The fact that you upset the establishment and do something which the establishment tells you is wrong is not a sign that it is wrong. Because the people of Britain are trying to get their freedom back from the establishment. The British Parliament and the European Union are in unity. They are the establishment. And it's very, very dangerous if we corrupt, and let's face it, every human being is corrupt. Therefore, the establishment's power must be limited. We must separate from Europe, because we are heading towards a world dictatorship. And if we have a world dictatorship, where are people going to flee to when they want to seek asylum? We have to have division. You have said yourself earlier on that we have to have division of power. Therefore, we have to have a division.
No, we
of
already
power.
have. We already have division of power. That was the point I was making. We have a parliament, and we have a court system, and we have a press, a free press. The very things that should tell you, Brendan, but for some reason they don't. That you do not live in a dictatorship. You live in a democracy where the bringing back of Parliament has just happened after it was unlawfully stopped doing its business. That, Brendan, is not a dictatorship.
But then, Sheila, if the establishment won't let you leave the European Union, then that is showing that the establishment wants to stick together. They're trying to maintain their power over the people. And if Boris Johnson goes against that establishment, that is and the establishment tries to slap him down.
What do you think the establishment is?
The establishment, basically, there is like a cultural Marxist, anti-Christian establishment taking over the world.
The Queen is the head of the Church of England, and she's the head of state. What do you mean?
Look, Sheila, let's take abortion for an example here. The British Parliament kills 500 British human beings every day. They are morally corrupt. It's a fact. They choose. It's not a fact, Brendan. It's not. I can't keep you on if you're going to say stuff like that. It's not a fact. It is a fact that we have abortion provision and abortion laws in this country. It is a fact that the majority of the British public still support those laws and the existence of those laws. It is a fact that people like you and others disagree with the nuts and bolts of those laws and the way that those laws are observed. It is a fact that it is still a criminal offence, extraordinarily, to have an abortion in this country. So the abortion laws need looking at. That's one thing to say. But what you have just said is simply not true. It's not a fact. And it isn't a fact that we live in a dictatorship. We live in a currently very uncomfortable, but very alive and very kicking parliamentary democracy. We do not live in a dictatorship. You offend and you disrespect, actually, Brendan, every person on this planet who actually does live in a dictatorship and feels the full force of that. You are freer than you care to look at. John has called from Pisa in Italy to talk about this. Go on, John. Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, loud and clear. Fire away.
Excellent. Okay, we're all being so naive. The difference between me and other callers is that this is orchestrated. They would have had the same legal advice. They knew they would lose. They did not provide a defence. We're all playing into his hands. They did it on purpose. After all, it was only 5 extra days. He didn't need to do it. It would have been suspended anyway for 4 of the 5 weeks of prorogation
no, it wouldn't.
for the party conferences.
It wouldn't. Because it wouldn't, because MPs were bringing a recess motion or the recess motion would have been defeated because MPs believed that they needed to be there.
Okay. Well, I'll give you that point then. So it plays into the narrative of the beleaguered Prime Minister with his party, with Parliament, and with the law against him, and he, for the 17.4 million, trying to leave. All MPs are held in the lowest regard because of expenses. They're seen as crooks. He will go into the election
maybe
as
by
the
you,
champion of the
not
people.
by everybody.
He will go into the next election as the champion of the people against the establishment. He, the patriot, carrying out the will of the people. Corbyn will be characterised as against our country, being a traitor, a Czech spy, a friend of terrorism, IRA and Hamas, and wanting to create a European Venezuela.
Oh, yeah. They're old allegations, aren't they? Brought again and again. That would have happened anyway.
Okay. The dispossessed and the Little Englanders who came out in their millions to vote leave.
Oh, now you're offending people. John, thank you. John in Pisa. Simon in Bushy. Hello.
Hello, yes. Thank you. I agree with a lot of what your previous caller just said.
This makes you admire Boris Johnson even more, does it?
No, I think Boris Johnson is doing a wonderful job. I know by your language that you obviously don't like Boris Johnson.
My language?
Because you want to put him back in his box.
My language?
Your words.
No,
your
no,
words,
no.
Put him back in his box.
Yes, but no.
A Remainer.
Let me
I
explain.
Think this is all once. Let me.
No,
talk.
actually, I'm going to tell you, because you have just said something about my language. I'm going to explain my language. When I said he's been put back in his box, legally, he's been put back in his box. The caller was making a point about Boris Johnson having his powers clipped. He hasn't had his powers clipped. He's been told to go back into the box in which his powers actually exist. That is what I meant. Don't misrepresent me. Now you can talk. Simon.
It's a wonderful day for Brexit because it's a British court that has had a British Prime Minister in front of it. And I want to know what would happen now if this British Prime Minister went to the court in Luxembourg to appeal it.
That would be funny, wouldn't it?
Because that's what goes on. That's why I think we need to leave Europe and be on our own, so our courts can control what has to be done, not a court in Luxembourg.
Well, fortunately for you, that's what's just happened today.
I think, well, what would happen now if Boris Johnson said, well, I don't accept that, I'm going to Luxembourg to appeal it, to overturn it?
Well, we'd have to understand that we live in a wider world, that's all.
Well, no, we live in Britain, we don't live in Europe, we don't live in Luxembourg.
But do you know why that wider court exists in Europe? It's so that people are never trapped in a country where they can't, where they have no recourse to malign law if it were ever to come in.
It exists to spread its net all over Europe.
Okay.
So that eventually there will be a European army, a European Parliament.
Okay, I'm just going to leave it there. Simon, thank you. Need to go to the break. Thank you very much indeed, Simon in Bushy. Jim in Richmond Park. Hi, Jim.
Hello, Sheila.
Hello.
We spoke some time ago when I explained to you that May's withdrawal agreement was really a capitulation, and thank goodness everybody else agreed with me. Today's act by the Supreme Court, they will regret this, because they've done this to the People's Prime Minister, Boris, who is trying to get the Brexit which we voted for. It reminds me of the French Revolution.
Really?
When the aristocracy, the elite, those in Westminster bubble, said let them eat cake if they have no bread. We are not in a democracy. Our elites print money and give it to the banksters, and we, the people, have to pay for it. The elite let our medics dose us up with opiates, so that 1 in 4 of us are now hooked on opiates. We are not in a good country, better than some. They let Thomas Cook go bust, when it would be much more sensible to take over Thomas Cook, put in the right management to make it streamlined. They let Alfie Evans die when there's many people in the...
Okay, it's a bit sensitive, isn't it? Jim, I'll let you have your say. You were talking unadulterated rubbish, and I think it's important that sometimes, from time to time, we just say it as it is. Peter, Folkestone, hello.
Hey, Sheila, how are you?
I'm okay, Peter. How are you, Peter, on this fine day?
I'm a bit ticked off, a little bit ticked off, because I don't understand what all the kerfuffle is about. The first thing I'd like to say is to do with the Labour Party. This afternoon, Jeremy is going to stand up, and on the walls behind him are going to be the words, people not privileged and for the many, not the few. And it would appear to be that for the many, not the few only applies if you didn't vote to leave the EU, because the many who did vote are now being kind of ignored and let go. And that seems kind of wrong. And
not by Jeremy Corbyn, they're not. Not by Jeremy Corbyn, they're not.
I would have thought that if they had any smart workers in the Labour Party, they'd be taking those words down now to avoid the ironic jokes. The idea that Boris has broken the law, it doesn't seem fair to me to say that. I know the court's made the decision, and I know everyone is jumping up and down about it, but he is allowed to prorogue Parliament. He's the Prime Minister. They changed the law after he made the prorogation, right?
Who did?
Made that change.
Who did?
After the court. the court and the idea that this is...
What law did they change? What law have they changed?
Forgive me. Let me roll on things.
What law has been changed?
This is an act of democracy that somehow the Parliament can be changed by the legal expertise, and that's somehow helping democracy. I
think the lack of phone quality there is getting in the way, Peter, and it's time to go to news headlines. But no law has been changed since the prorogation of Parliament. Let's get that on the record. Well, not least because Parliament wasn't sitting. You see? Because Parliament is where laws are made. Thank you.
First, here's James in Essex. Hi, James. What do you think of what's happened?
Oh, hi there. Yeah, no, I just think the Prime Minister is well within his rights to try and stand up for the people who voted to leave in 2016. I feel like the decision by the Supreme Court today is essentially a power grab. They've changed the law, and let's think about what's happened here. This is the fox investigating the chicken coop.
Well, they haven't changed the law, have they? They've upheld the law.
Well, they haven't, because they've invented new law. Everybody knows, as Boris Johnson said in his statement today, that prorogation is perfectly legal.
Well, the Supreme Court said it isn't, James.
That's what I said. That's what they've done today. They've changed the law.
No, they've disagreed with the Prime Minister.
No, they've interpreted the law in a whole new way.
They've interpreted the law in a way you don't like.
No, well, personally, yes, I disagree, as does the Prime Minister. But what they've clearly done, they've gone against precedent to give themselves greater power. And the result of that is...
No, they've used the powers they have to say the Prime Minister broke the law.
Yeah, but if you just let me finish my point, what's going to happen from now on is rich people, like Gina Miller and her friends, are going to be able to take government to court on basic, policy, and particularly policy that was voted for by the general public in the 2016 referendum, and change it with the judiciary on their side, because judiciary now seemingly are able to change the law at the drop of a hat.
No, James, they haven't changed the law. They've looked at the law, and they've looked at the arguments they heard for 3 days last week, and they've decided that Boris Johnson was wrong. And it's up to any citizen, to challenge the government in court, and it so happens on this occasion it was Gina Miller and others.
Yeah, exactly. Rich people can afford to do so. Most people who voted in the 2000 referendum to leave wouldn't be able to afford to challenge a decision like that in court with Miscon de Rea behind and all the rest of it. So they're creating a situation here where democracy is being bought by rich people against the will of the general population.
Why is the wealth of some of the people who brought this case relevant?
Because taking the government to court is a rather expensive pastime.
Aren't you glad they did? Aren't you glad they upheld the rule of law?
No, because what they've done...
You're not glad the rule of law has been upheld?
No, what I'm saying to you, I'm disagreeing with your premise. I'm saying they've changed the law to suit...
Well, you keep saying that, James, and they haven't. They've upheld the law.
Well, I'm saying they've interpreted the law in a new way.
In a way you don't like, yes. And I'm saying, what's it got to do? There are plenty of rich people in government. Boris Johnson's got a few pennies, so's Jacob Rees-Mogg. What's that about?
Well, Boris Johnson, obviously Boris Johnson's wealthy, so is Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm not. I'm far from wealthy, but I happen to agree with them. I happen to agree that, they should be standing up for the result of the 2016 referendum, which he's trying to do against the entire establishment.
But James, as the government said, the government's own lawyer argued in the court case that we're talking about that the court case had nothing to do with Brexit. So you keep bringing up the referendum, and the government itself says this case had nothing to do with Brexit.
Yeah, and I understand that, and the 11 Supreme Court judges said the same thing. But look at the effect it's had on Brexit. It looks like tomorrow, as I was listening to on your radio station earlier, an old rejected plan to leave is going to be rehashed and voted on and potentially that will be the means by which we leave the European
Parliament
Union.
will be in control, James. Don't you want that?
Yes, I do ultimately want Parliament to be in control, but what we've got now is a situation where the opposition, who have no mandate, are clubbing together to create policy.
Well, the thing is, James, you can't want Parliament to be in control and support a Prime Minister who prorogued it, and that's what's changed. James, thank you.
Surprised. I think most of us surprised that the court ruled this way. Like the Prime Minister, I disagree with them. Of course, I accept their judgment. I do think it's worth pointing out that the Supreme Court also disagrees with the Lord Chief Justice, President of the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court, 3 of our most senior judges. So it's not just me and the Prime Minister who find themselves at odds with the actual decision. And I think it's a very interesting position because although the Supreme Court is constitutionally superior, the judges who have been overruled by the Supreme Court includes our most senior judge, the Lord Chief Justice. So it's a pickle.
Do you think Boris Johnson might have helped his case if he provided some evidence to the court that it wanted, in writing, for why he'd made this decision in the first place?
Well, look, I am not a lawyer, and I am not an expert.
Neither am I, but I know that didn't come over very well.
Well, I'm not an expert in the presentation of cases to the Supreme Court, but I'm interested
but you would understand if you want to make a case to a court, you defend it, you explain your reasons.
Absolutely, but I'm not going to get into criticising the Prime Minister.
Why not?
And the law officers' decisions.
Is he beyond criticism?
Nobody's beyond criticism. What I'm interested in is how we go forwards, and what I do know is that this judgment has deepened our political crisis, a crisis which fundamentally arises because Remain backing parliamentarians have refused to do the right thing, which is to vote for a general election so that the public can sort out the composition of Parliament and we can carry out a legitimate democratic decision. I mean, that's the fundamental problem.
Well, no, the fundamental problem is that Boris Johnson lost in court today in a case which his own side argued in court had nothing to do with Brexit. This was about his decision to prorogue, which we've agreed he didn't in any way defend, he didn't explain in writing to the court. And I'm suggesting to you that was a bit of a boo-boo.
So you're wrong to say it's the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem we have is that the government of the United Kingdom does not have a majority in the House of Commons, and that is upending our constitution in a number of
Boris Johnson got rid
ways.
of 21 MPs. That doesn't help him.
Well, of course he did, because they had voted to take the power to determine the business of the House of Commons and hand it to a ragtag coalition of the leader of the opposition and a number of rebels. And that is fundamentally an issue of confidence in the governing party.
But you can't complain on the one hand that this is a minority government and then support a decision to make it even more of a minority government.
No, you absolutely can, because Boris did the right thing, which is to table a motion for an early general election. Look, the abomination that's at work here is the Fixed Term Parliament Act. I dutifully voted for it and didn't rebel at the time, despite some of my other colleagues, Jacob Rees-Mogg notably, voting against it, because they foresaw that there would be all sorts of problems with it, and here we are. Because the Prime Minister has to get a supermajority, 2/3 in Parliament, to have a general election, he's now in a position where he's totally hamstrung by the opposition refusing to face the electorate. And that is the heart of the problem. We are currently governed by a government which does not enjoy a majority in the House of Commons, and that is really the fundamental point.
Well, can I suggest
the right thing to do is a general election.
Can I suggest to you the fundamental problem is that Boris Johnson finally fulfilled his lifelong ambition, and within 8 weeks he's lost all his Commons votes, 6 of them. He's lost 23 MPs. He's acted unlawfully by suspending Parliament, and he's misled the monarch. Can I suggest to you that perhaps he's not a very good Prime Minister?
No, that's not the case at all. And look, I have to tell
Which of those
you,
facts
your
are wrong?
listeners... Well, I'm trying to answer the question before you interrupted.
Well, you said that's not the case at all. Tell me what was wrong in what I said.
So the point is this.
No, what was wrong with what I said?
I'm going through it now.
No, you're not.
Well, if you interrupt me, your listeners will listen to this and hear you interrupting me after just a few words. The Prime Minister is in a position which he wishes to adopt. It is not ignoble to want to be the Prime Minister of the United
Kingdom. I'm going to interrupt you because you're not dealing with the point. I said he lost 6 Commons votes, 23 MPs, suspended Parliament, misled the monarch. You said that was wrong, and you haven't told me where.
Your first point was to suggest that having achieved his lifelong ambition was in some way some sort of grubby ambition. It's an entirely noble position to want to be the Prime Minister of the UK. But the problem that he has inherited...
You're hearing things I'm not even saying.
The problem he has inherited is that Theresa May put us into a position of minority government.
Here's the problem I've inherited, Steve Baker. I've asked you this question several times. You're hearing words I'm not saying, so I'm going to bring the interview to a conclusion here.
Mark is a new caller from Northampton. Good evening, Mark.
Hi, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
What should Boris do, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I think that he's been fed bad advice, basically, by the Attorney General. I don't think that the minutiae of British constitutional law is really his forte, and he acted on the advice that he was given, and that advice was bad.
Well, the advice, I think, was based on what had happened for the last 800 years.
But it's not his job to know that inside out, really. It's not really his
Well, it is. Well, it is. It is.
It should.
For the Attorney General, it is, isn't it? I mean, the Attorney General, you know.
The Attorney General, yeah, it absolutely should be. It shouldn't. It arguably should be Boris's as well. But it absolutely should be the Attorney General's job. It is his job one of his many jobs, to feed the Prime Minister accurate information. And on this occasion, he hasn't.
Do you think a head should roll somewhere, Mark?
I don't know. The whole thing is...
Do you know what? I don't know is, without doubt, the most honest answer that anyone can give right at the moment, because it's very, very difficult to predict the future. Do you feel a bit sorry for Boris, Mark, or not?
That's where I've been for the last few years. I've got to say, I'm immensely... grateful to you for everything you've done in British politics over the last few years. I used to be an ardent Remainer. I voted Remain. I believed in the European project. Mm-hmm. I believed that staying in the European Union was the best thing for us. And then something happened, and something monumental happened, and it completely changed my opinion on the whole situation.
What was that monumental thing, Mark?
I was kicked in the head by a horse.
Right, very good. OK, fine. Thank you. Mark, we're going to move on from that and go to David, a new caller from Thatcham in Berkshire.
Carl has called from Stoke and Brendan in Ruislip. Brendan, I think you've been waiting a while, so I'm going to go to you first. Hello, Brendan.
Hi, Sheila. I'd just like to say I think Geoffrey Cox is right, because he's putting things in the right order. Parliament and the law are not... as far as the system goes, they're sovereign, but they're not ultimately sovereign. Morality is above them. And if they're not actually doing what is right and moral, then they are not acting.
Yeah, but morality is very, very fluid in a way that the law isn't.
The thing is, the people voted to leave on the 31st of October with or without a deal. There was no specification, and both with a deal and without a deal were discussed beforehand, and it's on record that the Prime Minister said, if we don't have a deal, we'll leave on WTO rules.
But can I just say about that, you're right to say that, but he was saying it as a bad thing. He wasn't campaigning for it. He was saying it would be a bad outcome. Nobody on the Leave side campaigned for a no deal.
But the people decided. The people decide. They knew what the score was.
Did
the
they?
people decided in the vote. You might say, well, a lot of people didn't want it, but that's the way we decide these things. It was decided beforehand that what the people decide would go through.
Well, and listen, it might yet happen, Brendan. I mean, you know, it hasn't happened yet, but the process isn't complete.
But the thing is, it's obvious to the general public that the Remainers are cynically using the law and the powers of Parliament to frustrate what the people voted for, because the Liberals...
In what way when you say Remainers, do you mean MPs? Remain MPs?
Yeah.
What are they? What are they? Well, how are they cynically using the law, given that it's the government, a pro-No Deal Brexit government, that has just been found to have cynically misused the law?
No, the government didn't cynically use the law. I know that the Supreme Court found against them, but they didn't cynically, because they were using the law in accordance with morality, because they were serving the people, what the people wanted, whereas Parliament and the Supreme Court are going against what the people wanted. Therefore, it's the Parliament and the Supreme Court which are not in line with morality.
Oh, OK. Thank you, Brendan. And again, worth reiterating that the Prime Minister himself voted against Brexit twice in the House of Commons. Carl in Stoke, hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Sheila. You all right?
Yes.
Good. My call was a little bit different. I've been really interested in politics since Brexit. Before that, I've got a vague interest, but since the Brexit vote, and politics has I've been really interested in it. But
it's exploded into life in a very particular way, hasn't it? Yeah,
it has. But what I'm interested to know, and I'm hoping you might be able to help, or a couple of other of your callers might be able to help, is watching Parliament today and Geoffrey Cox, and there's been a lot of questions asked of Mr. Cox and Mr. Johnson regarding the proroguing of Parliament. But it isn't. I don't think it's just a simple situation of Mr. Cox saying to Mr. Johnson, "Yeah, you can prorogue Parliament," and he goes to the Queen and she says, "Yeah, you've got my consent." I'm pretty sure there's a lot of advisors involved along the way, but all the shots from the opposition are now being fired at Mr. Cox and Mr. Johnson. And don't get me wrong, I don't want the Queen in Parliament having to answer questions, but she's authorised this, and then we have a Supreme Court.
Who has authorised it? The Queen.
I'm pretty sure Mr. Johnson had to go to the Queen and say, "I'd like to prorogue Parliament."
But she only acts on the advice presented to her by the Prime Minister.
Okay.
She has
she's
to.
The Queen of England. If I had a letter from the Queen tomorrow saying...
You're blaming the Queen for this, are you?
No, that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to blame the Queen. What I'm saying is, if I had a letter tomorrow from the Queen saying, "Carl, you've got to run 500 miles," I'd go and do it because she's the Queen of my country.
Would you really?
Yet. Yeah, I would, yeah, because she's the Queen.
Oh, gosh, you wouldn't ask a reason why?
I wouldn't have to. She's the Queen of my country.
That's
what
strange.
I'm saying is...
Can I come back to that with you? I'm fascinated by that idea. Go on.
Yeah, okay. What I'm saying is, I just think that there are tactical reasons why Mr. Johnson's doing. And I'm not a Conservative member, and I don't support the Conservatives at all. I just like fairness. But now it's opened up a can of worms for the opposition parties to fire everything they can at Mr. Johnson because he's prorogued Parliament.
But it isn't just the opposition. It isn't just the opposition in the Commons.
It might be the country, yeah.
Even within Parliament, there is a whole zigzag of views in Parliament, and that's fine. That's what Parliament's for. Both. There are people, he sacked 21 of his own colleagues, Boris Johnson, remember, from the party whip. So it isn't just opposition MPs. And there are Labour MPs who will support a withdrawal agreement.
That's not what we're discussing, is it? What I'm saying is...
No, but I'm just clarifying for accuracy.
He's gone to Her Majesty the Queen. He said, "I would like to prorogue Parliament." And she said, "OK, go ahead." Might be wrong, it might be right. He may have presented misleading information. What I'm saying is, the Supreme Court have ruled that it's unlawful for that to happen because he's misled the Queen. Nobody's asked Her Majesty the Queen, "Have you been misled? And if so, why?" But they've ruled that she's been misled based on what?
To be clear, that's not quite what they ruled. They ruled that it was unlawful because the government was unable or unwilling to bring forward a reasonable explanation of why a 5-week break was required. And in their refusal to do so, the judges, all of them, deemed it to be unlawful. Second to that, we'll come on to the Queen now, second to that, they said that therefore, by natural extension of that, if the prorogation was unlawful, the advice given to the Queen must by definition therefore be unlawful too. They don't need to ask the Queen if she was misled. They didn't say misled. People on Twitter are saying it. People are saying they misled the Queen. He lied to the Queen. The Supreme Court said it was unlawful, and therefore the advice to the Queen was unlawful.
Yes, and I accept that, and I would never ever advocate the Queen being asked to step into a court and explain her actions, because I would never advocate that. But in answer to your question, yes, I do believe, and I don't know why it hasn't happened, and that's one of the points I would like to. If someone knows why the Conservatives wouldn't put their case forward to the court, because it sounds strange that
we know why, don't we?
It might be tactical. It might not.
Sniff the wind a bit, Carl. Come on, sniff the wind a bit. We know why, don't we?
The other point I wanted to make, though, was, yes, so the court have ruled it's unlawful, and now you have opposition members shouting at Boris saying, "You've acted unlawfully." Well, did he? Because was there a law in the first place that said he couldn't do what he did? So when he did what he did, he was acting on good faith from the advice of Mr. Cox, rightly or wrongly. He's acted on that information.
But they didn't question his good faith or his bad faith. They just looked at the length of time of the prorogation, the reason given for it, requested an explanation from the government as to how they reached that decision. No explanation was forthcoming. They judged it to have stymied, to have frustrated Parliament, and therefore sovereign Parliament, the supreme law-making body in the land. So they judged it to have been unlawful. That's why.
Which you've got to accept. What I'm saying, though, is, did Mr. Johnson break the law.
Yes.
And I'm saying, well, did he? Because there was no law for him to break.
There was.
He made the...
There was.
Because...
The laws on prorogation and the reasons for prorogation. And he wasn't able to give them in a way that satisfied the Supreme Court.
Then you've answered my... Well, that's one of the things you're not trying, because to me, as a normal layperson, and this is what I think about Parliament, they need to be more open and they need to explain things.
I agree with you. And Carl, I'm a normal layperson when it comes to this stuff, because I don't know. I don't have a law degree. I don't understand the law any more than you understand the law. I've had to ask question after question after question to get even the scant knowledge that I have about this situation, because I'm the same as you. I don't understand all the ins and outs of it all, which is why we get experts on the radio to tell us.
And now you have, but that's the problem. You have experts on your show who've got an agenda, and what they'll do is they'll explain their reasoning on their agenda, but they won't explain everything.
Why? But that isn't true, Carl. That isn't true. Some people. Listen. It's very easy and free on LBC to say, "Here's what I think." I did it in my interview with John Healy earlier on. I said, "Listen, John, I'm with you. I think he did it for I think the same as you as to the reasons Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament for 5 weeks. I think it was entirely to shut Parliament up. But let's just so nobody was hiding an agenda. But no, it's important that I say this. Routinely, particularly on this, we have just got legal minds in, constitutional experts who are able to tell us how things should work and where they didn't work, based on law
all I would say
only.
On Boris Johnson is, although I don't support his party, what I will say, whether it's right or wrong, at least, and it might be the wrong decision, but at least he's made the decision and to leave without a deal. He said, we're leaving on the 31st of October. Whether I agree with that or
it's not his decision.
Look, he's the Prime Minister.
It's not his decision.
He's made...
Let me explain something else to you, if I need to say it again. It isn't his decision. He is first among equals. That's why he's called the Prime Minister, not the only minister. Parliament will say what happens.
But Parliament are unwilling to make a decision, and Boris is.
They're unwilling to make his decision.
But someone has to. At the end of the day,
I know, and the answer is a sovereign Parliament, Carl. That's what everybody wanted, strengthened, a sovereign Parliament. It happened yesterday, and some days that sovereign Parliament will make laws that you agree with, and some days that sovereign Parliament will drive you crazy and make laws you don't agree with. That is a parliamentary democracy. Thank you for your call.
James is in Blackburn. James, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say that I don't think that the language used by either side is offensive or wrong in any way. In case it's actually mild compared to the conversations that the public are having up and down the country.
Yes,
I work for the NHS, and the conversations that we have on the wards are far more heated and language used in those compared to what's used in the House of Commons.
Do many of you get death threats?
Yeah, we've had a few.
For your political views?
Not to my political views, but I've had a few death threats.
Not for your political views?
No,
and when you share news of these death threats with your colleagues, they call you names, do they?
Well, I've been called a few names because of my political views by colleagues.
That's not what I asked. When you tell your colleagues that you've been receiving death threats, they laugh at you, do they?
Yeah, there's quite a few on the left that have laughed, yeah.
See, you're lying to yourself now, James.
Well, I'm not lying to myself. You can't tell me I'm lying when it's actually happening.
Oh, I can. You work at the NHS, you get death threats, and your colleagues laugh at you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you need to take that straight to HR, pal.
HR won't do anything about
How do you know?
Like that. Because I've worked in the NHS
send me the paperwork and I'll do it for you. We'll get the press office. We'll get the press office on the case. Send me the death threats and then give me the names of the colleagues that laughed at you, and we'll look into it on your behalf, my friend. Because that's unacceptable behaviour.
What's not acceptable is the blocking of Brexit.
Send it first class, James. Yeah, and I'll refund the cost of a stamp. When can I expect it?
I won't be doing that.
I know you won't, pal. John is in Grimsby. John, how is my life going to get better?
Well, hopefully I'm going to get a pay rise. I've not had one since 2008. Good morning, by the way.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I'm a truck driver in Grimsby, and since 2008 I've not had a pay rise. I've been laid off 4 different times as well, and every time at this companies I was at, I asked for a pay rise. Actually, my money's gone down since then.
Well, of course,
Every
and then
time
when
I
you
ask for a
factor
pay
in the
rise-
fall in the pound, it's gone down even further, hasn't it, since 2016?
No, that's only the last 2 years or 3 years. I'm
Yeah, I know.
talking 2008.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 11 years.
The international financial crisis.
Are you going to let me finish?
I'm not talking, John.
You are. You said it's down to the crisis. Just let me finish what I've got to say, okay? And then you can, have your say.
I'm literally
I've
not talking, except to point out that I'm not talking.
You're talking now.
As I just said, except to point out that I'm not talking.
Okay, fair enough. Since 2008, I've not had a pay rise. I've been laid off 4 different times from different companies that, after I've been laid off, have employed an Eastern European because they're cheaper than I am. Every time I've been for a pay rise, when I've been at a company for 2 years or more, I've asked for a pay rise. They've said to me, see on that table over there, John, there's 100 applications there from Eastern European drivers that will do your job for £200 a week less than what I'm paying you. Now, if you was me, would you give me a pay rise? And what have I got to say? I can't really say anything, have I? I don't blame the Eastern Europeans, but when you've got uncontrolled borders and you've got companies that are unscrupulous and will undercut the British worker, what's the only thing you can do? You've got to try and stop all those workers coming in.
And you must have been gutted when you found out that we could have done and that successive governments, including the Conservatives, had elected not to. But
Well, I agree with you.
So we don't have to leave the European Union to do any of the things that you've just described. Are you in a trade union?
No.
Well, see you then.
What do you mean, see you? What does that
You've got
mean?
no collective bargaining power, and you voted to actually surrender some of the rights and protections that have been put in place by European Union legislation that we've adopted in this country. Working time directive that we've opted out of. The Labour Party are saying that we will remove that veto. I don't want to fight with you, but there's no way you're going to be better off.
You're not giving me a fair crack of the whip here.
Okay, well, you keep talking then.
Okay. I'm saying even if I was in a union, which I don't want to be in anyway,
why not,
I still wouldn't have had a pay rise.
Why not?
Because I'm self-employed.
No, but why wouldn't you want to be in a union? Oh, you're self-employed. You're self-employed.
Yes.
Right.
I'm a self-employed truck driver that gets contracts with companies for X amount of years, so on and so forth.
And do you know, I hope you're right. I really do, John. That's all I can say. I hope that you are better off as a result of the pound going down, the economy suffering, and the Road Haulage Association describing... Hang on, no, you have to at least let me finish if you're going to accuse me of talking over you all the time. The Road Haulage Association have described the prospect of a no-deal Brexit in pretty much apocalyptic terms. I hope you're right and they're wrong. I really do.
Yeah, well, I don't believe them for 1 minute.
No, why would you? They're just... I mean, what do they know about road haulage?
Well, I know
what do the NFU know about farming?
What do they do? Most of those guys in that road haulage company have never drove a truck in their life. I have, and millions of other truck drivers that do it.
Well, it's not millions, is it? It's not millions, is it, John? It's not millions.
Sorry?
It's not millions, is it?
Well, it's 1.5 million.
Are you a member of the Road Haulage Association?
No, I'm not, no.
Okay.
No. And
when do you think the pay rise will arrive?
Of course it will arrive.
No, when?
When does it do? Well, when these people at Parliament finally get us out there, and then there isn't this influx of drivers all the time that's undercutting you.
And does that mean the cost
flow of cheap labour?
Does that mean the cost of everything you deliver will go up?
Why will it?
Because the deliverers are getting paid more.
No, it'll just mean the bonuses for the gaffers will come down.
Right.
That's where it all is.
So it's not the wages it's not the wages that are being paid to Eastern Europeans that's the problem. It's the size of your gaffers, even though you're self-employed. It's the size of your gaffers' bonuses.
Well, that as well. I mean, they're all in for it themselves, aren't they? The last person that's going to get anything out of these is the common man.
So when do you get your pay rise? When do you think you get your pay rise, mate?
I don't know, mate. How long's a piece of string with these idiots in Parliament?
Here's the question.
All the time? It's never going to happen, is it?
Here's the question. When do you think you're going to be better off? Let's put a date on it.
When we get out the EU.
Right. Because that will mean that there are
less
smaller
workers.
bonuses for your gaffers, even though you're self-employed, and fewer people applying for
Just because I'm
jobs driving
self-employed,
trucks.
it doesn't mean that I haven't got a gaffer.
No, I know it doesn't. That's why
You're
you need a
self-employed,
union.
aren't you?
That's why you need a union.
No, I don't need a union at all.
Well, that's how you challenge gaffers, mate. It's just you on your own, or millions and millions of truck drivers. I mean it, John. I really do. I really, really, really hope you're right, and that somehow the predicted economic damage that everybody accepts, they're just arguing over the scale of it or how long it will be. You've heard them say there'll be short-term economic damage. The pound will suffer. Some of Boris Johnson's backers poised to make tens, hundreds of millions of pound profits from the expected collapse in the pound. His own sister, John, I don't know if you're aware of this, his own sister yesterday suggested that the reason why Boris Johnson is pursuing the path that he's pursuing might be because so much money has been invested in a collapse in the pound that would follow a no-deal crash-out Brexit. But hand on heart, mate, I really hope all of those circumstances deliver a pay rise to you. I don't think it will, all right? And deep down, I don't think you do either. Brian is in Sheffield. Brian, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hello, Brian.
Well, just on that other bloke, but we're on about trade unions. I've only one thing to say about trade unions.
Yeah.
Maggie Thatcher. She killed them.
Yes.
Trade unions anymore. They've no power. No power anymore.
Well, I mean, he was with respect. He was talking about the railways, wasn't he? So that doesn't apply.
Trade unions. I've been one for all association for many years.
Yes,
I've been driving for the 35 years.
I just mentioned the railways because they still have quite strong unions.
Well, they ain't got any power, have they?
Well, they've got lots.
You can't get them any better deals.
Really?
But anyways,
no, mate, no. I'm sorry to start off being fractious. No, we're not going to argue. But you just have no, Brian. They do have a lot of power. You only need to turn on a radio on the day that the train drivers are going on strike or tube drivers are going on strike, and you'll find some knee-jerk. Yeah, because and then they get. Brian, you have to, mate. I mean, you must surely, at some point in your puff, you must have heard people complaining about how much tube drivers and train drivers get paid.
We get paid peanuts. So we get paid.
Oh, never mind. Yeah, go on. You crack on with the benefits of Brexit, Brian.
Well, we do. We get paid peanuts.
Bob Crow was
we have done for a long time.
Bob Crow was an absolute waste of space. All the right wing loved him because he was so useless at getting pay rises for his members, right?
Unions were good at one point.
No, just give me Bob Crow, Brian. Why did they all hate Bob Crow so much? He kept getting pay rises for his members. But anyway, you give me the benefits of Brexit from where you are in Sheffield.
Right. The reason I voted exit, right?
That's not necessarily what I'm asking. I want to know what you're most looking forward to as a result of crashing out at the end of October.
What I'm looking forward to
is
being able to make deals for our government to be able to make deals with other countries without being interfered with by that lot in Brussels. Right? Because at the minute we can't.
Who are we going to make deals with?
Who are we going to make? America's offering a deal.
Yeah.
China's offering us a deal.
And do they just do what we want, or do we have to be interfered with by what they want?
Look, it's going to be give and take, isn't it?
Right. And if you've got 50 million customers, are you going to be doing more giving or less giving than a market? Hang on, Brian. How can you possibly know what I'm about to say, Brian? If you've got 50 million customers, are you going to do more giving than a market with 500 million customers, or less giving? In other words, who is the more powerful negotiating partner? 500 million or 50 million?
Yeah, but the EU restrict us doing a lot of things.
Well, you know what I do now, don't you, Brian? You know what
banana.
You know what I do now. No, that's not funny anymore, Brian. It was funny when you voted in 2016, but now you're live on national radio describing the benefits of what you have elected to do as a result of decades of misinformation being poured into your undeserving, innocent ears, and you've got to have more than bananas. When you say on national radio, they stop us from doing things, they stop us from doing things, you said, they stop us from doing things, at which point I say, what do they stop us from doing, Brian?
Well, To be honest, I don't really know.
What are you doing on the radio? It's been 3.5 years and you still don't know. Is it possible that you're wrong, do you think?
I could be. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong.
And what happens if you are?
What is you going to give us?
What do you mean?
The EU... I have read
Brian,
the Lisbon Treaty.
Brian, come here.
Have you read the Lisbon
Brian,
Treaty?
I have, but I'm not going to answer questions on it at this point in proceedings because I want to point out to you that the EU is us. You say, what have the EU given us? It is us.
No, I'm British. I'm not European.
Well, what continent is Britain in?
Well, I don't think we're in Europe. We're Britain. I'll be glad when we depart.
Okay. So, just before you go, one more go.
Opinions and I have mine.
No, these aren't opinions.
Whatever the reasons be, right?
Yes.
You'll always want to stay, and I'll always want to go out.
Not true. I'd support leaving tomorrow if you give me 3 good reasons for leaving. Go on now.
To get rid of that unelected mob in Brussels.
Who elected Dominic Cummings?
He's just an advisor.
Well, so are the people who are elected in Brussels.
Point. He can be sacked by the government at any point.
Yes, he can be.
Can you go and sack? He can be sacked by our government at any point. Can we sack any of them idiots in Brussels?
Of course we can.
No.
Well,
we cannot. We can.
Oh, okay. So who can sack them then?
Voted in.
Oh, for heaven's
Nobody
sake.
can.
Who votes for MEPs? Oh, Brian, I love you, mate. I hope you have a cracking weekend. I really do.
There we go, mate.
Just before you go, one benefit in terms of your life and how it's going to improve?
I don't know.
I know.
We don't know.
Oh, who cares, eh? Vanessa is on the Isle of Wight. Vanessa, what will you put on my list?
Right, I'm a Brexiteer.
We don't use that word. Sorry, nothing personal because it makes you sound all sort of gallant and chivalrous. So we say Brexist or Brexiter.
Yeah, I'm a county councillor on the Isle of Wight, so I'm a politician, James, with a very small p. I
love that description.
Do the best for my constituents.
Good.
And, of course, I'm appalled at the way our MPs have and are behaving. And to me, it shows how David Cameron and his cohort of MPs were completely out of touch with the country when the referendum came along because it got the shock of their lives. He never, ever believed that he would lose.
Well, nor did Boris Johnson ever believe that he would win, of course.
Oh, listen, I don't disagree with you there.
Well,
Farage began to smell that...
Oh, no, because of course he did announce on the night that they'd lost, and then the pound plummeted, and then mysteriously they won. And loads of people who'd bet on the pound plummeting made an absolute fortune. So he's possibly not the best example in this context.
No, but, I mean, he does have a political sense.
But he announced that they'd lost, and then watched the pound plummet, and then it emerged that they'd won, and that some of the organisations involved perhaps in those investments had conducted their own deeply sophisticated polling about what the result was likely to be. So let's just park that bit of it and focus on why you rang me.
Yeah, right. I want to leave the EU for 2 really big reasons. First of all, they are totally unaccountable with regard to the billions that we have given them and the billions we are still giving them. In this country, if you did not publish proper audited accounts, you could end up in jail.
Yes, they do. They do publish audited accounts.
Do they?
Yes.
Well, I've been misled.
You just heard the guest we had talking about full fact and how important it is to do fact checks on this stuff. So here's the fact check on the question: is the EU's budget signed off by auditors? Claim: the EU's accounts haven't been signed off for years. That's the claim you've heard, like many of us. Yes. Conclusion: auditors say the accounts have been accurate since 2007, but they have historically recorded significant errors in how money is paid since their first audit in 1995. In the most recent year, they found a significant part of the EU's spending was largely error-free for the first time. So not only do they publish the accounts, they publish the errors. So what was reason 2? We're going to have to hope it was better than reason 1, Vanessa.
I knew I'd get taken.
See, I don't think you should be laughing, Vanessa, politician with a small p,
I really don't, because what you believed and what informed your vote was demonstrably wrong and easily discoverable to be wrong. But for the purposes of this programme, I will chuckle along with you. What's reason 2?
The difference between you and I is I'm an optimist.
No, I'm an optimist as well. I think now that I've shown you that you're wrong, you'll agree. That's optimism, right? Are you going to agree that you're wrong?
No, I'm not going to.
But I'm still optimistic that you will once the evidence becomes irresistible. Now, reason 2.
You're a pessimist. You believe...
No, I've just said I'm optimistic. I've given you the evidence that you're wrong, and I believe that you will acknowledge that because it's right there in front of you. But anyway, you said you had 2 reasons. The first one was nonsense. What's the second?
Oh, right. Let me get my head in gear.
OK, you take your time.
We absolutely ditched the Commonwealth when we joined the EU. We nearly bankrupted New Zealand because they couldn't export lamb to us, their main export, obviously, more sheep in New Zealand than people, and we nearly bankrupted them.
I don't mean to be rude, but are you suggesting that for the last 30 years you haven't been able to buy New Zealand lamb in the United Kingdom?
I'm saying that when we got into the EU, we nearly bankrupted them. Jamaica was very dodgy anyway. We couldn't take their sugar anymore. We put them on the line. What I'm saying is
that's not true.
Commonwealth still out there,
yes,
which we can trade with without barriers.
Well, we can't, can we? We need to have trade agreements with them in order to trade without barriers.
I understood it.
Pardon?
People inside the government have been setting up trade agreements over the last year.
But we have loads of trade agreements already with all manner of countries. I'm going to ask this question very politely.
Yes, go on.
What is? I mean, the major rule of trade is regarded to be gravity, i.e., proximity. So it's a lot easier for you on the Isle of Wight. It's a lot easier for you to do your shopping in Douglas than it is for you to do your shopping in Dundee. You understand that?
Yeah.
Right. So the reason why our trade is more likely to be with countries that we're really close to is the same reason why you will be doing your shopping this week in the Isle of Wight rather than in the Bahamas. So what is it about the Commonwealth versus France, Germany, Italy and Spain that makes you think one is preferable to the other as a trading partner, despite being thousands of miles further away? I mean, New Zealand is a great example, isn't it? Why would you rather buy your lamb from Dundee than from Douglas? What is it about New Zealand that is to you emotionally or intellectually preferable to a country you could swim to?
Yeah, but James, New Zealand, that is their main source. They export lamb across the world, I suspect.
Yes, but why would you rather buy your lamb from the other side of the world than the other side of the English Channel? I just want to know.
I don't think anybody in Europe... Who in Europe produces lamb apart from the
You've never
Irish
seen
and
any
ourselves?
sheep in... Well, the Irish then, let's use them. Why would you rather buy it from New Zealand than Ireland?
Well, I wouldn't.
Well, what are we talking about now then, Vanessa?
Expensive. What I'm saying is there are countries out there that we can trade with and that we have traded.
But there are loads of countries out there that we do trade with.
Yeah, and I'm saying they are there, and that's the optimistic
Would it be
side.
really unfair of me to point out that New Zealand's third biggest trade partner at the moment is the EU?
I didn't know that, but then...
That's all right. There's no reason why you should. Do you have any idea at all what the figure might be for bilateral trading goods between the EU and New Zealand?
No.
And I have to look this stuff up when I'm talking to people like you because I presume that you know and I need to get across the facts before I challenge you or talk to you further. But I don't, and please don't take offence. Your answer to every evidence-based question I've asked you about the groundings for your views has been I don't know or I didn't know. How have you ended up in that position? It's 8.7 billion quid in 2017. So how, in a sentence, what point did you think you were making when you started talking about the Commonwealth?
What I was trying to get over is that I'm a fairly intelligent. I don't
want to cast any aspersions on your intelligence, and I wouldn't dream of doing so. I really wouldn't.
And I'm a fairly ordinary person. I personally want to get out of Brexit and have...
But I know that, but the reasons you've given for it have all turned out to be wrong.
Right, let me do a little analogy. I get on extremely well with people next door.
Yes.
Moved in, very, very nice people.
Yes.
However, there is no way I would give them my housekeeping and at the end of the year say to them, well, how have you spent my money? I want to control my money in my own way.
Right.
I believe in localism. I believe in having county councils.
And how do you view the prospect of a Jeremy Corbyn premiership?
On the island.
How do you view a Jeremy Corbyn premiership? Are you looking forward to that?
Do you need to ask?
Well, I
James,
do need
please?
to ask, because people like you, Vanessa, and I mean this very affectionately, when you talk about Britain and control and wanting to do it yourself, you never acknowledge the fact that you might end up with a Marxist government in place, and that you would prefer that to European Union membership, because at least they'd be British Marxists.
No,
What then?
I do not want that. And, of course, Jeremy Corbyn never liked the EU.
No, but we're going off on a slight tangent here, because your entire argument is built upon what I think, in a polite way, you could call nativism. I'd rather it was our people doing it than them, and that's why the Commonwealth seems more attractive to you than our nearest neighbours, the countries that we've conquered or even enslaved over the years. You have more affection for than the countries that we are geographically closest to, which is why I keep asking just for the sentence. The thing that's going to be better.
Two things to say.
Why would getting my lamb from New Zealand be better than getting my lamb from Ireland? Or Yorkshire?
I don't care where I buy it, quite frankly. I look at
But that was your only reason for leaving the European Union a minute ago.
What I'm saying is that we nearly destroyed New Zealand when we moved into the Union.
Yes. But they're still there. You do realise that.
Now,
and they're the European Union's third biggest trade. The European Union is their third biggest trade partner. So you want to cease to be part of the market that is their third biggest trade partner in order to help them.
But you're then missing the point about
quite
my
possibly,
optimism
Vanessa. Yes.
in that New Zealand reinvented themselves. And I'm sorry, James, but this country is quite capable of, we've enough brains here.
Yes.
Reinvent ourselves.
Right,
Now,
I've
can
got
I
it.
just
So when you say New Zealand was nearly destroyed, you're now saying we should nearly destroy ourselves?
No, I'm
yes.
not. Right, I want to quote one other thing.
Okay, and then we'll call it quits and part as friends, Vanessa.
Hardly
Right,
quit.
but do look up, well, you're right, but I'm trying to be polite. Do look up the auditing stuff, though, because a lot of people fall for that. And if you are an elected politician, you kind of have a duty to tell your voters these truths.
Yeah, I feel slightly flattened, but then...
But you mustn't feel flattened, you must feel enlightened.
Oh,
That's why I'm an optimist, you see?
Listen, one other
I'm
thing
listening.
That has really affected our island, under EU regulations, local authorities have to tender all contracts. I think the figure is over £75,000, right?
Yes.
Now, on the island, the contract for cutting grass, etc., a few years ago, was done by a local company, very efficient, etc., etc. The EU regulation came in. A very small company did not have the expertise or the staff to deal with an 80-page contract specification.
Yes.
So they just couldn't cope with it.
Okay. Well, I will take that to the bank.
The contract then went to a mainland company. And do you know what happened? They charged us 10% more than the people on the island had been doing it for.
Yes.
And employed the company on the island.
But they were British, were they, that company you're complaining about?
Yes, they were.
Right.
But it cost
So, I mean, you realise that when we leave the European Union, it doesn't involve independence for the Isle of Wight.
No, but it will take away some of the bureaucracy that we are facing.
How will it?
Red tape.
How will it?
Because I presume, I am hoping, really hoping,
yes,
we won't be subjected to those sort of edicts coming out of Brussels.
Do you not think it might be quite important to have rules and regulations in place regarding people with sort of chainsaws and large mowing machines?
Oh, do me a favour, James.
No? All right, I will. Thank you. It's 12:18. Chris is in Manchester. Chris, what have you got?
Oh, hi there.
Hello, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I voted for Brexit, and then Johnson, obviously, with this lie on the bus about the 350 million. I was hoping we'd get a deal, and then obviously saw that, thought I'd have a bit of a look into it.
Yeah.
I realised actually the figure was a lot more. So I decided now I want a no-deal Brexit. I wondered if you could share with your viewers the figure of VAT.
It's a radio station, mate.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could share with your viewers the...
listeners.
Listeners, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
It's not a great phone line. Just give me the benefits.
Well, I want to know the figures. If you want to share the figures of what we pay on VAT on general day-to-day products that we buy.
Yes.
Because obviously a lot of people don't understand that 20% VAT, 15% of it is put on by the EU and goes to the EU. Only 5% of VAT goes to our government.
Right.
So we're paying 15% that goes to the EU on every sort of purchase we buy, which that 15%, you fail to add that on to the 350 million.
I'm just checking on all I can do is...
All you can do is get your researchers to
I can do it now.
As quick as you can.
I've got it.
What's the figure?
I've got it here. The European Union value-added tax is a value-added tax on goods and services within the European Union. The EU's institutions do not collect the tax, but EU member states are each required to adopt a value-added tax that complies with the EU VAT code. Different rates of VAT apply in different EU member states, ranging from 17% in Luxembourg to 27% in Hungary. The total VAT collected by member states is used as part of the calculation to determine what each state contributes to the EU's budget. So it's up to us what we set it at.
No. So 15% of it is enforced by the EU. 5% our government decides to put on. So where you've got your 17% figure and then up to your 20-something%, our government was collecting 2.5%.
Sweetheart, what do you mean, where am I getting
Don't insult me calling me sweetheart.
It's not an insult to call you sweetheart.
So there's... Well, I don't like it.
All right, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, precious.
It's like me calling somebody homosexual a name that they don't like, so please don't call me, you're insulting me. So 15%...
What's wrong with being homosexual?
I didn't say there was anything wrong with it. I'm just saying I find you offended me with a word, like as if I was to say something to somebody, perhaps that or whatever. Let's not change the subject. Let's stick to what we're discussing.
What are we discussing?
So every country has a minimum of 15%, but they put a bit on for themselves. The 15% is for the EU. That's what they set it at. Our government adds 5% on, which they used to add 2.5% because it was once 17.5%. So...
But none of this is true.
It's a fact. If you go online, you can...
Whereabouts online? Because I'm looking at...
Yes, I'll give you a figure.
Exactly. No, tell me where you go online.
20%
Where do you go online?
20%.
Just tell me where you got it from so I can go and look.
Why don't you let me finish speaking? Probably
because I want to check your source. I want to check your source.
You can check the source.
So what's the source?
20%.
No, that's a number. What's the source?
20% of the...
Where are you getting this information from? Because what I'm looking at is not supporting what you're saying. Where are you getting this from?
If you want to bear with me a second, I'll get it up on my phone and I'll find you the website, yeah?
Yeah, go on.
So just wait 2 seconds.
All right. I have to speak, but only because otherwise the emergency tape will kick in. I don't know, that this too solid flesh should melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting canon had... No? What do we get if I stop talking? Steve Allen tapes. Chris, can I come back after the break?
So I think it might be the Tax Foundation.
You think it might be what? No, I don't need might be.
I think it's the Tax Foundation. I'm parked on the side of a motorway, on the side of a dual carriage right at the minute.
Well, I don't want you getting into any bother.
No, I'm in a lane. I've got my computer with me, so I'm just trying to get it on the phone.
The Tax Foundation is American.
20%.
No, I don't want you just to keep saying 20%. I want to know what your source is, Chris.
Why don't you let somebody speak when they're going to counter something from all the toss that you talk all day?
Because you need to have a source. You need to. Otherwise, you're just a bloke saying 20%.
Heinz. The source was Heinz.
Heinz? Well, as in the beans?
Yeah, Heinz. Yeah, you got it. Heinz ketchup.
Heinz beans?
Yeah, that's the source.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that was almost funny. 12:43 is the time. Let's have another go. I'll just be quiet and you keep talking, but don't say 20% again. Just tell me where you are getting your information from.
So the European Union, 1/5 of their VAT collected comes from the United Kingdom. Can you tell me how many countries?
No, I need to know where you're getting this information from.
I'm just sharing it. Everybody can Google it. Everybody can Google it. It'll come up.
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
I want the good news.
I just have Googled it.
Yeah, and
VAT-based revenue, which comprises a percentage, usually 0.3% of each member state's standardised value-added tax rate and traditional owned resources such as customs duties on imports from outside the EU and sugar levies. So you're looking at about 0.3%, Chris.
Right. So you failed to read the news last week where they stated...
Chris, mate, this is... I don't want to part as enemies, but you haven't told me where you're getting your information from. You told me to Google it, so I did.
Brexit,
and now...
no deal.
But Chris, mate, chill out.
The next day, you wouldn't have to pay the VAT on your cigarettes and alcohol, what you buy when you come back from another country. Now, if you
the government announced that we won't have to pay duty on imports of cigarettes and alcohol from other countries.
15% of tax goes to the
all right,
European
Chris,
Union.
mate, you've done me. That's it. I've changed my view. I'm now a leaver. All right, you've absolutely done me, and I'm very sorry for calling you sweetheart. I don't know if anyone really needs this, but if you are interested, and I hope old Chris in Manchester is still in his lay-by, the VAT core rate is 0.3% of the 20% that we currently charge. The minimum that you can charge is 15%, but we keep 97.7% of it in this country, and the 0.3% that goes towards our budgetary contribution to the EU is part of that £350 million a week. It's part of the total. So our friend in the north was wrong about absolutely everything. The percentage of VAT that goes to the European Union, the suggestion that what goes to the European Union is in excess of what was already published on the side of that bus, and bless him, every other syllable that he uttered, actually, apart from the hilarious joke about Heinz. Oh, sweetheart.
There's a long way to go on Brexit. It's not about plotting alternative routes. I want to know how you feel if your side hasn't prevailed. Andrew is in Charing in Kent. Hi.
Hi there.
What do you think? Are you a Remainer or a Leaver, by the way?
Well, I actually didn't vote because I felt...
what were you doing that day, Andrew?
Well, I was just working.
The whole day? You couldn't get to a polling station?
It wasn't... I didn't want... It's not that I couldn't have voted, but I could see arguments on either side. So I don't really have an axe to grind, but if we don't leave the EU, it's quite clear to me, and probably most of the population, that there's no leaving, and the social contract has been broken.
So as an agnostic, if I can put it like that, you'd be cross if leave doesn't happen.
Well, it's quite clear that the will of the people is not respected, and we don't live in a democracy. And it's just a slap in the face for anybody that's ever voted.
Could you accept it then if we never leave?
No, I'd never pay tax again. I'd leave the country.
Well, that's quite a claim, isn't it? Where would you go?
Somewhere in Europe.
Andrew, thank you. Dean is in Barnet. Dean, which side are you on at the moment?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm a Leave campaigner, and I feel we're the winning team. We've already won, and a great programme today. But it's the Remainers that just they can't accept it, and they keep on fighting. And until they accept it, we're going to carry on with this.
Well, it's been interesting, Dean. We've had quite a few people who voted Remain or who are Remain now saying they would accept it. What about you? You're a Leaver. If tomorrow you woke up and learned that we were never leaving, could you accept that?
No, I couldn't. And I'll tell you for why. I'm in the building industry, and I've seen so many changes. We're just flooded with Eastern Europeans. Our hourly rate is going down. Same skills as what the English people have. And I just feel there's just too many of them over here now, and the guys that I have worked with, from Europe, they're all great, they're hard-working like I am, but there's just too many of them. We're overpopulated. and we need to do something about it.
Have you seen a change, Dean, since the referendum? There's some statistics saying that quite a few people who came here from the continent have gone back to their original countries. Have you witnessed that?
With a lot of the Polish I have, but the Romanians, no. But a lot of the Polish have gone back, and some of them are my friends. And I understand why they've gone back. It's because Poland has picked up that they can earn just the same amount of money in Poland as they can in England. Well, obviously, they want to stay with their families.
How long have you been in the building trade for, Dean?
45 years. I've done my apprenticeship in the Royal Engineers, and I've been in it 45 years, and it just seems since, I would say, 2004, I've seen massive amount of changes, and, I come to my workplace, and all you can hear is foreign languages. I feel like an alien in my own country.
Well, there's lots of things there. It's interesting. You talked about the financial effect on you, and I presume other people in the building trade. What about that business of hearing foreign voices? Why is that tricky for you?
Well, because I want to be a part of the team. I want to talk about what's going on with my football club. I might want to talk about my family. I'm just sat, sometimes on my own, and all I'm listening to is this crowd talking in their own language.
There would still be... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just feel like an alien in my own country.
There would still be immigration, though, wouldn't there? Even if we left the EU tomorrow.
But it would be controlled. We would only take on the people that we need.
Do we need builders? Do we need more builders?
No, my boss does, because he's paying them a lot less than what he would pay an Englishman, because they're happy to work for less. They don't have the same living standards as we do, in the sense, I've got a mortgage, a family to keep, whereas them guys, they have 2 or 3 families in one house.
Dean, good to hear from you. Dean, a Leaver would not accept the result if Remain prevailed.